Hello and welcome to episode 79 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan. I'm one of the co-founders here at ETR. As always, I am joined by fellow co-founder, the Lord of your top 150 rankings, Evan Silva. And today we have a very, very special guest. This is a young man who has been in the season-long streets, in the dynasty streets for as long as I can possibly remember. I know he loves to debate player outlooks, which is why he's here today. It is, of course, Sigmund Bloom, one of the most thoughtful people in the fantasy space, co-owner of FootballGuys. Sigmund, what's going on?
Just staying alive. Ha, ha, ha. No, it's great. Debate is great. And I think when Twitter was introduced to the streets, Twitter is like the streets of the streets. I liked Mike Clay, I remember, was my main rival, where we get the sword and shield out and bang away, because your strongest takes should be the ones that you're most open to being tested. You want to stress test them, and you want to find the smartest people you know that maybe feel differently and hear all the reasons that they feel differently, because you need to fully consider them. And if we're being honest, it's always probabilities, right? Even our strongest take is like 80-20 or 75-25. We're always acknowledging that there are other possibilities. And unless you've thought about all those possibilities, you haven't really prepared for your draft.
Exactly. Well said on probabilities. Of course, we always try to think about things in terms of range of outcomes, not a singular outcome. Evan, what's going on today, buddy?
What's going on, man? Ready to haggle over some players here with Sigmund Bloom.
Yeah.
Sigmund Bloom, of course, has the law background. He's going to take me to task here, but hopefully we can all learn a little bit.
Yeah, so as these guys alluded to on today's show, we're going to have a debate of sorts. People have said, and a small vocal minority have said, Evan and I don't argue enough. They want us to embrace debate. They want me to go full Stephen A. Smith. They want my head to explode, to go full Skip Bayless. No, I do think that some debate is good for the reasons that both Sigmund and Evan mentioned. Testing your theories and having smart people test what you're saying, I think, is really good. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about some situations. I will give my take, but I'll first let these guys go first. I'll be kind of the jury, the judge, the executioner, decide who won the argument, but I'll also give my take a little bit. And we're going to get to maybe, 8, 9, 10 situations here that we think are pretty interesting and have some disagreement on. Before we get into it, want to remind everyone of two things. First, our draft kit is just $35 and comes with a $25 FFPC coupon, overflowing with content and rankings, draft recaps, etc., etc. Also, in case you missed it, we are launching an NBA product ahead of the NBA restart. We'll be led by Drew Dinkmeyer, to me the best NBA DFS player on the planet, and Mike Gallagher, who I consider the Evan Silva of NBA. We'll be doing matchups columns, all types of injury stuff like that. Head to the site for more details on that NBA. Okay, on with the show. We are going to start with, I don't know how this guy got to be like the biggest debate on Twitter, but over the last week, the biggest debate on Twitter has turned into, is Tyler Higbee for real? Is what Tyler Higbee did down the stretch last year legit? Or is it just a flash in the pan where they're going to change personnel situations? Gerald Everett's going to play a lot more. Sigmund, I think, has the minority take among fantasy insiders, fantasy analysts, that Tyler Higbee's ADP is fine. He's not being overdrafted where he's going in the 7th, 8th round, I would say, in standard fantasy leagues. Let's let Sigmund start here, make the case for Tyler Higbee.
And what's fun about this, again, the lawyer brain, is probably over the course of the show, I'll cite an argument in favor of somebody and then cite the opposite side of that same argument. Like, it reminds me of constitutional law, where, depending on what side of the argument you're on, you'll say, well, this is the school of thought we should all be subscribing to. The simplest case for Tyler Higbee is he already did it. I mean, he already did it over 4 or 5 weeks, but he already did it. I might be a little personally swayed because Tyler Higbee had a terrible incident that caused him to drop from, say, the 2nd to the 4th round when he was coming out of Western Kentucky. But I loved Higbee in that Gronk, Kelsey, like dudes that that if there wasn't football, they'd probably just be like running into their garage doors or something. The way he plays the game, he fits well in the receiving tight end who's also blocking tight ends on the field all the time. And I was waiting for his breakout. I was waiting for it. And I had already given up when it finally happened. Now, we know that he did it, and he did it to the tune of being the most valuable fantasy tight end at the most important part of the year. And if you're not taking a top 4 maybe if you want to include Evan Ingram, because I think Ingram has proven himself he just can't stay healthy. So if you're not taking a top 5 tight end, adding Mark Andrews to that mix, you should be looking for top 5 upside. And simply, Higbee's already shown it. I do think the Rams will have more second half of the season 2 tight end looks than first half of the season 3 wide receiver looks. There's a Cooper Kupp take in there somewhere. I also like to appeal the idea that Jared Goff, when the bullets are flying, Higbee was coming through for him repeatedly, and that will carry over. I know there's the small sample size warning. And then, if Everett couldn't stay healthy last year, who's to say he's going to stay healthy this year? They took Bryson Hopkins in the 4th round, which tells me they already know they're not keeping Gerald Everett. He's kind of a lame duck player at this point. Maybe he could even be a trade deadline player. But really the simplest case here is I saw with my own eyes, we all did, we saw him do it. And almost every other player outside of the top 5, you're doing some sort of projection or aspiration, and Higbee's done it.
Evan, your rebuttal?
So Tyler Higbee entered week 13 of the 2019 season. He played 58 NFL games in his career, mainly a blocker. He had reached 50 yards in 2 of those 58 games. Gerald Everett gets hurt. He was on pace for 61 catches through 9 games last year, playing well ahead of Tyler Higbee in the receiving role. After that 9th game, he only plays 35 snaps the rest of the way. He suffered wrist, ankle, and knee injuries. I suppose it's possible that Tyler Higbee just straight up Wally pipped Gerald Everett to some extent, but it is scary that up until that point, up until that week 13 of last season, Gerald Everett had 56 targets and Tyler Higbee had 26 or 27. So, Tyler Higbee, of course, he went off in those final 5 games. Again, we've talked extensively. I had him on both of my FFPC main event teams. He was carrying us on his back. But everything kind of worked in his favor during that 5-game sample with Gerald Everett getting hurt. Cooper Kupp was not the same down the stretch. Brandon Cooks was in and out of the lineup. So I get it if you're aiming for the upside. And at the end of the day, that's what we're aiming for. But I think that his floor is pretty low and he's at major bust risk. And I like taking Gerald Everett in the tight end 20 range more so than Tyler Higbee at his ADP of tight end 7.
Yeah, my thing, and I know I've said this to Evan before, is that there's a lot of tight ends that you will find in the back of drafts that literally cannot do, will never, ever do what Tyler Higbee did in the last 5 games of last year. So the fact that he can actually do it at that position means a lot. It means way more to me than it would mean at running back or wide receiver. I mean, there's tight ends that just are never, ever doing what Tyler Higbee did. I think that his ADP has come into a range where a lot of the bust is factored in. 8th, 9th round is not a lot of opportunity cost to spend on a guy who showed he can be the tight end 1. I kind of think that the Wally Pipp thing Evan mentioned, kind of arguing against himself a little bit, might be true on Gerald Everett. Sig mentioned the rookie that they drafted in the 4th round. I'm going to go ahead and give this round to Sig, but I do like the idea of a lot of these late round tight ends. I mean, if you can get Gesicki later, Ian Thomas later, Chris Herndon, guys like that who go way later than Tyler Higbee, I think that's a totally fine path to take. Also, Sig, I'll give you the last word on Tyler Higbee. Anything to respond to on what Evan said?
Well, I will say this. My actionable advice to people would be not necessarily to take Higbee at ADP, maybe wait around or don't take him until he's a value. And then the other part of the strategy you articulated well, which is bookend him with somebody else. And, it could be Blake Jarwin. It could be Mike Gesicki. It could be TJ Hawkinson. Whoever it is that you like. Even Jared Cook, he's falling too far. Greg Olson. And then if Higbee indeed is more of a role player in the passing game the first 3 weeks, you move on and you don't necessarily have to scramble. So I think that while I might be a little stronger on Higbee than others, that the right move is probably still to wait to take him until he's a value and to make sure you have him hedged. But I'm looking forward to seeing. I think the Rams offense is one of the hardest ones to decipher, and it might be one of the hardest ones to decipher week to week. And there might be weeks we feel like we got it figured out, and then weeks that we don't understand what's happening.
For sure. Okay.
I think for me, the best approach is to either take a truly elite tight end, whether it be Kelsey or Kittle. And I like Ertz a lot too. I warm up to him more and more every day. Or just wait until you get to that Jarwin tier and not take Austin Hooper in the middle rounds, not take Tyler Higbee in the middle rounds, not take, maybe Jared Cook or Gronk is kind of dicey. He's going to be really touchdown dependent, I think. And Hayden Hurst, I'm losing confidence in every day. To avoid that middle tier, either take an elite guy or wait for the Blake Jarwins, the Chris Hernans, those types.
Yep, Ian Thomas too, I'd throw in there. Okay, let's go to AJ Green. AJ Green, obviously one of the best fantasy football players that of the generation. Last time we saw him healthy, he was still among the league leaders in yards per route run, which is one of our favorite stats, obviously, coming off of an injury, which may or may not have been injury, but gets a big upgrade with Joe Burrow. They add T. Higgins. They have the run game talent there. They get Jonah Williams back. They have way more talent than they've had in a long time in Cincy. I'll let you start, Evan. I believe what you're going to argue here is that AJ Green is not a good value at his ADP. Sig will be arguing the other side. Go ahead, Evan.
Yeah, I actually opened up with AJ Green kind of ranked right at his ADP. And then when I did the Bengals team preview, I just like a whoopee cushion, and AJ Green was a guy that I was like, man, I don't want any part of this. So he gets the franchise tag, and he's not the type to come out and say anything publicly against the team. He's always been a quiet, real hardworking dude. Obviously, an incredible Hall of Fame caliber talent. But there were whispers that last season, part of the reason that he did not come back from the high left ankle sprain had to do with contractual issues with the Bengals. He wanted a long-term deal. They were unwilling to give him. He got hurt playing on this. You remember that? But before the season, playing on some field. It was like some commemoration. They were practicing. I think I want to say it was at Dayton University or something like that. And there were like pebbles out on the field. He gets injured then. The year before that, in 2018, he suffered a right toe injury that cost him 7 games. So over the last 2 seasons, he has missed 23 games due to foot injuries. He's going into his age 32 season. We really can have no idea what he has in his tank right now. The Bengals, they're not going to get a long-term deal done, and that's what AJ Green has wanted. So I wanted to put him in like a boom bust wide receiver 4, I think is the best way to characterize him. And so we have him in the 40s, and his ADP is still in the 30s among wide receivers.
Sigmund, your rebuttal on AJ Green.
So it's just that AJ Green is a badass, right? I mean, it's just that he's so good. And never have we seen AJ Green play and look like anything but basically, like Evan said, a Hall of Fame level receiver. Now, we may see in the preseason, in camp, like Evan is saying about the injuries. I can't argue against that. And probably later on in the show, I'll say something like, when a player gets hurt in this many consecutive seasons, then you shouldn't argue against that and say, well, this is going to be the season that he can stay healthy. But because AJ Green on the other side of that scale has been one of the dominant receivers of this era, and because his ADP is falling, some drafts you'll see 9th, 10th, 11th round, it's the opportunity cost. And I also like to look at previous year ADP just to compare the hive mind, because last year when we knew AJ Green was hurt, he was going in the 6th round or so he's not hurt yet, and you're getting a major discount from that. The other thing I like is, let's say after the first 7, 8, 9 players, I like to look for players with early reveals. And basically what I mean is, we're either going to see AJ Green take the field and he's going to look like AJ Green, and everybody who passed on him is going to say, man, I passed on AJ Green for, Jerry Jeudy or something. And why did I do that? that didn't make sense. Now, of course, in game 2 or game 3, he limps off the field, and you'll say, well, that's why he did it. That's one of the things about this is, like, over the course of the season, you're right and wrong about a player, even for the exact reasons. You know, you'll nail it, and then 4 weeks later, the exact opposite case will come about, and you'll say, well, I was right, and then I was wrong. And then we don't know how Joe Burrow is going to affect this offense. And that's an unknown, and it could be a negative unknown, but it could be a positive unknown. And based on what happened last year, I'm more open to being a positive unknown. I'm also more open to Zach Taylor and Brian Callahan instituting something more like, now the no offseason issue looms over us here, but I'm more open because the first week, like, go back and watch the Cincinnati offense against Seattle, the first week of 2019. I thought, well, here's an exciting offense. This is going to be an offense that is very exciting for the passing game. They're going to attack at all levels of the field. They may support 2 or 3 fantasy wide receivers that could be every week starters. And then the air just went out of the balloon. So I'm open to a lot better Bengals offense to the one we saw last year that could also help out AJ Green. But some of it is just respect. Like, players like AJ Green, I'm fine. Like, Rob Gronkowski was another one. Like, I'm fine with being like the last people left on the island, just as emotional attachment, you know?
Yeah. I agree with Sig that AJ Green is a badass. I remember one of my best DFS days was AJ Green in week 1 a while back. It was up against Darrell Revis, and nobody wanted to play AJ Green against
already.
Darrell Revis. He was like 2 or 3% owned, and AJ Green just waxed Revis. It was a beautiful thing to see. That was a long time ago, obviously. I want to be high on this Bengals offense in general. I'm concerned that the defenses in the AFC North are awesome. I mean, I think Ravens, Steelers, Browns with Myles Garrett obviously healthy, they have 3 of the better defenses in the league, and I think that could spell problems for Joe Burrow in year 1 in those games. But yeah, you know, one other thing I'd say about roster construction, Sig mentioned AJ Green's going the 9th or 10th round. By then, I have, in all these drafts, I have already taken wide receivers in rounds like 3, 4, 5, 6, and so in rounds 9 and 10, I'm often not looking wide receiver, and maybe that's a reason that AJ Green's ADP and all those guys, all those receivers in that kind of wide receiver 35-40 range are dropping maybe a little bit further than this should. So I'll give a slight win to Sig there. I haven't targeted AJ Green yet, but man, yeah. Okay.
Circle takes the square.
Let's go to somebody in some circles who is known as a grown-ass man, and that is Devante Parker. Devante Parker last year, after Preston Williams went out and Ryan Fitzpatrick got in, became one of the more productive wide receivers in the NFL, finally living up to his first round talent. Sig, I'll let you get started here on Devante Parker, wide receiver 1 for the Miami Dolphins.
Yeah, and there's going to be a theme here, right? Because, again, it's like just Devante Parker, for his final act last year, just mossed Stephon Gilmore, the defensive player of the year on many people's sheets. So it's funny. It's like the emotional scars, right? Because year after year, we all knew what Devante Parker was capable of from his college career. And every year we wanted to believe, and there would be the offseason puff pieces, and he would get hurt, or otherwise he would fall short of expectations to the point where it's like Lucy with the football, and you're saying, not this time. I'm not even going to try to kick the football. Last year, and there's a perfectly good explanation for this. It's the Adam Gase effect, right? Let's continue to track this, because you had Ryan Tannehill, you had Devante Parker, you had Kenyon Drake to an extent, where these players, and then on the other side, you saw Le'Veon Bell as a Jet. You saw what happened to other players under Adam Gase. And it makes sense to me that Parker, without that influence around him, was able to have his head on straight and build momentum. There is some uncertainty with Ryan Fitzpatrick or Tua, although Tua is one of the better passing rookie quarterbacks if you have to rely on someone to keep your player afloat. But I think if we were looking at, like, if Devante Parker season happened for a player who maybe it was a career high year, but they hadn't let us down time after time after time, then I think his ADP would at least be around or 2 higher. And I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt because his arrow was pointing up and he played his best football at the end of the year.
All right, Evan, Devante Parker's ADP is around, I believe, the 6th or 7th round typically. Now, what do you think about Devante Parker? Your rebuttal?
Yeah, he's in the late 20s among wide receivers, which I think is okay. We're about, I think, 4 or 5 spots below ADP on Devante Parker. I really don't have a problem with his talent. I do think he's got some, the comparison actually coming out of college to him, the common comparison was AJ Green. And I don't think his talent was ever an issue. Really, it was his sort of off-field habits, which have been documented, like in the Miami Herald. Like he would just eat like fast food all the time. He didn't know how to really take care of his body, and it took him a while. The splits last year with and without Preston Williams are massive. I mean, Devante Parker went from a guy who was averaging 49 yards per game to after Preston Williams went down, he averaged almost 100 yards per game. The Dolphins finished number 7 in the NFL in pass attempts. And I don't think that they're going to be able to get back to that. They're changing offensive coordinators. I do kind of like Chan Gailey, and I like his history of innovation and creativity. But how much of that innovation and creativity is he going to be able to install over Zoom conferences? I think that the likelihood of in-season quarterback change is very high in Miami. And like I do like Tua, but Tua isn't going to have like practice with Devante Parker. I mean, you hear coaches all the time during the season, the number 2 quarterback doesn't get reps because the number 1 quarterback gets all the reps. So it's just, I don't think this offense is going to be very good. And I think that there's going to be a lot of guys sort of working to cancel each other out. And I mean, Ryan Fitzpatrick's going to have some moments, where, and there will be some spiked weeks in there, but I'm lower than consensus on Gesicki. I'm lower than consensus on Devante Parker. And at the end of the day, this is just an offense that I don't want really any part of.
Big thing for me, if you could guarantee me 16 Ryan Fitzpatrick games, I would be higher than market on Devante Parker. I think Ryan Fitzpatrick just breeds big fantasy wide receiver seasons based on the full YOLO, throwing pick sixes, giving his receivers big time chances to make plays downfield. However, I don't think that they're going to give Ryan Fitzpatrick anywhere near 16 games. I think they're going to get Tua in there relatively early, and I don't think that will be good for Parker, for Gesicki, for Preston Williams, etc. So for those reasons, as Evan mentioned, I'm going to go ahead and give Evan the win there. Probably not in on Devante Parker when there's so many wide receivers there that I really like in rounds 4, 5, 6 for the most part. Any final word on Devante Parker, Sig?
That's a big concern. And, hopefully the lack of an offseason allows under Chan Gailey Fitzpatrick to play the YOLO ball. I think that the offense we saw in the second half of the year was a lot different than the offense we saw in the first half of the year. But bringing up Preston Williams is absolutely relevant. And it may be that Preston Williams is the easiest arbitrage play here because it seems like because of his breakout game was his injury game that he's not being taken seriously. And he could absolutely be the right answer in the Dolphins offense.
Yeah, certainly tracking.
Staying on the topic of this offense, I just want to ask, because I've seen a lot of hype on Matt Breida.
Yeah.
I've always been a fan of him, but I mean, he ain't going to score touchdowns. He's really never caught passes.
Right.
So, I mean, I can't do it with Breida.
The thing on Breida is he's just one of those guys that we know he can play.
Mm-hmm.
That's not, and in some ways, I can't argue with anybody who, say, from the 10th round on, just takes players that we know they can play. But the offensive line is still a work in progress. Jordan Howard is like catnip for coaches. He runs the whip play exactly the way it's supposed to. He gets some yards after contact. He falls forward. That they're going to use him. So I just don't see any. What did we have? Was it last year against Cleveland when Breida ripped off that 80 or 90 yard run? And I think that's when everyone was like, "It's happening! It's happening!" And then he fell out of favor, fumbles. So yeah, I think you're right that it's almost impossible to tell a story between the injuries and his role and the barren soil of the Miami running game. How Breida's going to have more than 2 or 3 sustained games of excellence in a row. Maybe for a best ball league, he's more the kind of guy I'm looking for in the second half of the draft, but not redraft.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to Brandon Thorne's offensive line rankings, which will be up on the site in the next month or so. Already has his defensive line rankings up, but I am curious what he thinks of Miami's offensive line heading in. Obviously does not look too great. All right, let's get to arguably the most efficient passer outside of Lamar Jackson last year. That was Ryan Tannehill. Turns his away from Adam Gaze's season into, I believe it was like a $116 million deal from the Titans. I'll let Evan start here on Ryan Tannehill, who I don't believe has cracked Evan's top 150 or anywhere near it. Go ahead on Ryan Tannehill, Evan.
Have you noticed that Sig gets to be like positive about everybody, and I have to be like,
that's because in the pre-show sheet, we all we got was Sig's who Sig's likes, so we didn't get get who Sig didn't like.
I wrote an article like 3 or 4 years ago about how optimism can help you in fantasy football, but really maybe it's just like the light of the tunnel is just the train that's going to run you over.
So I am a little surprised that Sig likes Tannehill, because I know that because I listen to all Sig shows, and I know that he is into looking at early season schedules, especially for quarterbacks. And this early season schedule for Tennessee looks absolutely brutal from a pass defense standpoint. They go to Denver in week 1. They come back home and they face Jacksonville, and that should be fine. Although that's, Derrick Henry 4 touchdown territory. At Minnesota, the Vikings, their secondary has been depleted and will be made over this season, but it's still a Mike Zimmer defense on the road. At home against Pittsburgh, can't use them. And then at home against Buffalo, can't use them. So that's a really, really difficult way to start the season for Ryan Tannehill, who we all know is going to – we don't even have to talk about it. Like, it's going to happen. He's not going to lead the NFL in passer rating again. He's not going to lead the NFL in yards per attempt again. Although I do think that he's going to have a fine season. I like how he fits in that offense. And I'm a really big believer in Arthur Smith as well, the second-year OC there. And I think the Titans are going to be good this year. They have, according to Sharp Football, the second softest schedule in the NFL based on opponent win totals. All that points to me back to the big dog, Derrick Henry, and away from Tannehill. So although I do think that he is actually – I think he's become almost underrated, Ryan Tannehill, because just the pendulum keeps swinging on him. And now everybody's just like a doubter. And, with the way that he played within the context of that offense, I thought it was really, really impressive. Again, those rate stats are probably not – or almost certainly not going to repeat. But I think he's a good distributor within the context of that offense. And he's going to have a solid season. But from a fantasy standpoint, I don't want him.
I think we're seeing a theme here, Sig, where guys who produced last year, albeit in small samples, you seem to be higher on than market. I think Ryan Tannehill fits that in there. Go ahead with your rebuttal.
Yeah, it's the regression argument, right? The idea that players, and I think it's absolutely true that some of these players can't keep up the rate, the efficiency that they established at their highest points last year. But I also think if we divorce names and situations from numbers, and we just looked at, and Tannehill really falls into the same category as Tyler Higbee, where I think the market is overestimating regression or overpricing overweighting regression or the possibility of regression, because Tyler Higbee could regress 20% from his peak last year or 25% and still be a top 5 tight end. Ryan Tannehill can regress 25% from his fantasy peaks last year. Once he took over, only Lamar Jackson was better, and he can regress 4 or 5 points a game and still be a top 10 quarterback. So you're already seeing some padding there. And I do think Evan brings up a good point about the early schedule. And I just want to say as a aside, Scott Barrett, who I know we all enjoy and respect, call a friend, he actually asked me to come on my show last week just to talk about coronavirus and how this season, especially for sports betting, is not going to be like any other season we've ever seen, and everything is going to be different. And for fantasy, I think one of the ways you can adjust for that is really weighting that early schedule and getting off to a hot start. I think Evan's right to zero in on that for every player. And I would hope, and this, again, it's like an early reveal, I would say that Tannehill is part of a 2-quarterback strategy where you take Tannehill and then somebody else you like. It could be Bridgewater. It could be Ben Roethlisberger. There's Aaron Rodgers is falling into the teens sometimes. And you see what I would hope for Tannehill's fantasy outlook is that these teams like Denver, now with Jarrell Casey, Minnesota, Pittsburgh, Buffalo, they're not going to be intimidated by Derrick Henry. They're not going to need to sell out to stop Derrick Henry, and they're going to put the game on Ryan Tannehill's shoulders, and we'll see whether it was more of a one-year wonder or now the league's got film on him, or however you want to put it, or if Ryan Tannehill in this offense, and I think Evan's right to bring up Arthur Smith, with the play calls, the timing on the play calls, kind of Kyle Shanahan-esque at times, how they'd have the perfect play dialed up and anticipating exactly what the defensive mindset would be. And we'll find out. But after what Ryan Tannehill did, establishing himself as the second or third rated fantasy quarterback, you don't need to tell me anything else. If you tell me I can get him as the 15th quarterback, I think that's a good proposition.
My argument against Tannehill is you need volume if the efficiency is going to regress. And we saw a lot of games where Ryan Tannehill attempted 17, 18, 19 passes in a game and just was going nuts in fantasy on that little volume. That is just absolutely not sustainable. If you want to argue that he's going to get up to 25 or 30 attempts per game, we might be talking. I just don't think that's going to happen for the Titans. And we see efficiency regress already on low volume. I have pretty big concerns there. So I'm going to go ahead and give that one to Evan. I also agree with Sig, though, that if you do, I would put Tannehill in the same range there as like Teddy and Burrow. And I prefer Roethlisberger, but definitely like Tannehill, Teddy, and Burrow for me are three of the later round quarterbacks I think are at least in play, depending on which ones fall to you and what happens there.
If you are looking to take Tannehill in best ball, which is where I would be willing to take him, I would not take him in redraft season long because I'm going to end up dropping him because of that early season schedule. But if you are going to take him, he makes sense with a guy like Garoppolo or Bridgewater who do have favorable early season schedules, and you know they kind of align nicely.
All right. I want to get into rookies, and I know Sig has a take about the rookies in this unique offseason. I want to talk about two of them. First, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and then I also want to step in and argue against Sig on Zack Moss, who every draft I've done, I've ended up with Zack Moss, so I'm excited to argue against Sig with that. But let's start with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I know you have been outspoken with a take about trying to fade all the rookies this year, given what is going on this offseason. Does that include Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Sig?
Yeah, I think so. And I love Edwards-Helaire. And he might be so efficient on the role he has in the offense. You know, Kareem Hunt as a rookie, still, what did he play, guys? Like 55% of the snaps or something like that? I mean, Kareem Hunt was nowhere near an every down running back. But what he got the opportunities on in such an efficient offense, and it's even more efficient now, I think there's scenarios where both Edwards-Helaire and Damian Williams can end up being good picks. And I'm not going to tell anybody who said I spent a second rounder on Edwards-Helaire and an eighth rounder on Damian Williams that they did something wrong there. Any really getting any piece of the Kansas City offense. I just think that when you think about a coach's mindset, right, the whole assumption of rational coaching, in some ways, assumption of rational coaching came out of this phenomenon we watch where every week we see running backs that are less dynamic, less explosive, add less value to their touches, get play over running backs that are clearly more physically talented, more able to, you know, break tackles, break long runs, do something inspired. And I think that coaches, not all of them, but some of them, prefer the guy, like we're talking with Jordan Howard, you know, the guy that they know is going to play assignment football. And with running backs, really with every position on the field, you can add incremental value with execution and talent on top of that execution, but the loss, the potential disaster when you don't do your job can be a lot more. Like if you forget you're the hot route and you throw a pick six because the linebacker's just sitting there and the ball goes right into his belly or something like that. And also we have with Damian Williams, positive buzz. Damian Williams, and here's the other thing about Damian Williams. It isn't like Damian Williams is one of those running backs where we said, well, they can clearly do better than him. I mean, maybe from a durability standpoint they can, but he's always executed exactly how they would ask, especially in the passing game, especially in the red zone. And I think that I don't expect him to just be swept aside in those roles. And you could easily see Damian Williams getting like 8 or 12 touches a week. But if those numbers are dialed up, 3, 4, 5, 6 of those touches are in the red zone and goal line offense, he's still an every week play. And this offense could produce enough touchdowns so that he could still be scoring a touchdown, 3/4 of a touchdown a week. You do out the numbers, and maybe only getting 50, 60 total yards and a couple of receptions, and still be very fantasy. This is almost more of a pro Damian Williams take than an anti Clyde Edwards-Helaire take. But then I'll go back and circle back and say, in the second round of drafts, I don't think the running back value is there. I don't think the wide receiver value is there. And I just think it's a quarterback tight end round, like Evan was talking about earlier, about going in big on one of those top tight ends.
Yeah, and I think we had a similar take on Damian Williams initially. I think Evan's gotten a little bit higher on Clyde Edwards-Helaire somewhat recently. I don't know where you're at now, Evan. What do you want to say about Sig's take on CEH?
I don't think that he really made a real strong statement there about Clyde Edwards-Helaire, other than he probably doesn't want to take him in the second round, which I would agree with that. I think we actually agree on this topic. And the most interesting aspect of this topic is that the Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Damian Williams situation also applies to a bunch of other sort of situations around the league, like DeAndre Swift and Kerryon Johnson and Jonathan Taylor and Marlon Mack and J.K. Dobbins and Mark Ingram and even Cam Akers and Darrell Henderson, to where there are talented veterans in place. I realized that Darrell Henderson did very little, although I thought he was impressive when he did get opportunities last year. Few and far between they were. But there are a lot of situations where a rookie running back is entering a situation and there's a proven veteran already there. These rookies are not going to have time to practice. I don't think there's even going to be any preseason games. So most of them are probably going to start slow. We are going to stay above ADP on those veterans like Marlon Mack and Kerryon Johnson. We want these guys on our teams as our RB3, 4, 5s, and then the question becomes, how long are you willing to be patient on some of these running backs? And what if just they don't happen at all this year? I mean, that's now in play. So we're going to stay ahead of ADP on those proven veterans, and then acknowledge the risk that, we've been talking about how the coronavirus and the lack of practice time and OTAs, we've been talking about this since April. So now we're really putting it into effect in our rankings and our tiers. And it's definitely coming out that we're going to be betting on the proven veterans being able to hold off the rookies this season.
Yeah. Two things in Clyde Edwards-Helaire's favor, I think. First, the history of first-round running back usage is massive. Like, teams don't take running backs in the first round and then not use them. Now, you could say this is different because Corona, because Damian Williams is hashtag good. The second thing working Clyde Edwards-Helaire's favor, obviously, is just a unique offense. Like, just unbelievable. Clyde Edwards-Helaire obviously plays extremely well in the pass game. So does Damian Williams, though. And Damian Williams has proven himself as a pass blocker, wheel route, red zone, as Sig mentioned as well. I want to come out of the first two rounds ideally with two running backs. When you get to the back part of that second round, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is often staring you in the face as one of the better, at least projected, running back plays. I'm tempted to pass on him there as well. And sometimes that means I end up with a wide receiver or, God forbid, a quarterback or a tight end. But yeah, it's an interesting dilemma. But for sure, I'd rather have Damian Williams in the 8th round than Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the 2nd. And I don't know if that means who wins the argument, but I think both of you are on the same page there. Okay, I'm excited for this one. I'm going to go ahead on Zack Moss, Sig, and then you can retort. The Buffalo offense projects to have among the most running back rushing attempts in the league. And I know Josh Allen spells into that in somewhat. I think they have one of the more underrated defenses in the league. It's going to set up really positive game scripts. And I know everybody thinks Josh Allen steals all the goal line carries. They gave Frank Gore, the corpse of Frank Gore, 18 carries inside the 10-yard line last year. Frank Gore gained negative yardage with that and only scored 2 touchdowns. Frank Gore also got 11 touches per game, even though they almost completely faded him out down the stretch last year. He could have ended up, if he played down the stretch, with 12, 13, 14 touches per game. Zack Moss, I understand there's been no offseason. I think he can be dropped right into that role as a running back. And if you tell me he's going to get a floor of 11 touches and maybe 1-2 carries from inside the 10-yard line on average. That's really exciting in the 10th round to me. And then if Devin Singletary were to get hurt, well, now we're really cooking with hot gas on Zack Moss. So I think he has some standalone value as well as value, a lot of value if Devin Singletary goes down. So I think in the 10th round, Zack Moss, when I go modified 0 RB or 0 RB or whatever, I'm ending up with Zack Moss so much. And when I'm pounding wide receiver in the middle rounds, I'm often ending up, I can't take AJ Green because I have to take a running back in the 9th or 10th round. And a lot of times that's Zack Moss. So that's my Zack Moss take. I can't see any possible way you can possibly refute what I said, Sigmund, but the floor is yours.
Yeah, look, I will say, similar to Damian Williams, Zack Moss's hot zone is really good for fantasy football because he's load. He's going to be the goal line back. And you're right to bring up that Frank Gore. I think everybody can go back to last year and watching Bills games and seeing Frank Gore in the huddle at the goal line and knowing he was going to get the carry and knowing that he was going to get stuffed. And just, next is going to be a Josh Allen sneak or whatever was going to happen. It was frustrating. And Zack Moss might make that less frustrating. He's a good pass receiver. He's a really fun pass blocker too. If Jonathan Taylor was a pass blocker the way that Zack Moss was, we'd be talking about Taylor as a 3-down back, and maybe he'll still figure that out. My main hesitation with Zack Moss is it's the same one I had with Dave Montgomery last year. Is I just don't see NFL burst. I see a running back, especially when he's going to be side by side with Devin Singletary, that the team is going to have a dedicated role for him. And that dedicated role could be enough to sustain fantasy value, but I don't necessarily see the ceiling, although you're right to bring up the Devin Singletary injury upside. I guess I just want to take players that I'm excited about. And because Zack Moss, to me, seemed to be a bit of a plotter in a straight line, like David Montgomery, he can break tackles. He can be a creative, active processor runner. But when things get a lot faster, I wonder how much slower he'll look. So that's why I'm hesitant to take him.
Yeah. And I think this is a general philosophy thing where Sig and I disagree just because of the styles that we play. I play DFS where talent, means so little compared to opportunity. Sig, I think, is more into season long and Dynasty where talent means way, way, way more, obviously. So yeah, it's an interesting argument, but I'm giving myself the win on that one. No question. Evan, do you want to give the people a quick Zack Moss take?
Well, we are 5 spots ahead of him, according to, or 5 spots ahead of his ADP. We have him at RB40, and his ADP in the Football Guys championship right now is RB45. Both Singletary and Moss were 3rd-round picks. I think it was interesting. I thought a lot of running backs went earlier than I expected in this draft, and I thought that Zack Moss was probably going to be like a 5th or 6th rounder, but he went in the 3rd. So, and that's the same round in which Devin Singletary went. Devin Singletary wasn't great as a receiver, as a rookie. Zack Moss caught a bunch of passes in college, and that pass blocking ability that Sig mentioned will increase the chances of him getting on the field early. But I don't see that even as their goal line back. I don't know that he has that much touchdown equity because of Josh Allen and because Devin Singletary is still going to, get opportunities, at least in the red zone. So I'm fine taking him as like an RB5, but he's not someone that I'm trying to aggressively draft. But there have been instances where he's on the board and I've taken him, and I feel pretty good about it as like an RB4/5.
Yep. Okay. I want to move to Will Fuller. I made a friendly bet with Drew Dinkmeyer yesterday, Will Fuller versus Marquise Brown, most fantasy points this season. And so I decided to put up a poll on Twitter, and every response, of course, is Will Fuller is gonna get hurt. Oh my God, he's gonna tear his groin 2 games into the season. How could you possibly do that? You should have gotten points per game, not total points. It's like, obviously that's baked in. If we knew Will Fuller was gonna play 16 games, he would be going in like the 4th round, right? So and maybe Sig disagrees with that statement, but I think that with DeAndre Hopkins gone, with what we've seen, Will Fuller's natural talent, with Deshaun Watson there, I think that Will Fuller, if you guarantee me 16 games, would be like 4th or 5th round ADP. And maybe that's a hot take. Maybe it's not.
There is no more confident Twitter than injury prediction Twitter. Yeah. they know exactly what's going to happen.
Right.
And in terms of guys getting injured.
And I get that Will Fuller is more likely than somebody else to get hurt. I don't think he's more likely than Marquise Brown to get hurt, who had Liz Frank, who weighs like 160 pounds. But that's an argument for another day. I don't think that Will Fuller is just like, obviously there's guys in the league, like that are less likely to get hurt than Will Fuller. I'm still willing to gamble because his ADP has sunk into like, you can get Will Fuller in like, I don't even know, sometimes 7th, 8th, 9th round. Explosive upside, obviously, for Will Fuller. I don't have much of an argument other than the dude is a baller. DeAndre Hopkins is gone. You can get him the 8th or 9th round almost solely because of injury risk. Go ahead, Sig.
So, Houston's pass offense is one of the biggest puzzles this year to project for fantasy football. And the central question is, how important was DeAndre Hopkins? How much was DeAndre Hopkins doing to hold this pass offense together? And I honestly don't know, but I am open to or even projecting drafting as if Hopkins was creating some of that opportunity for Fuller, or at least the matchups, the coverage, the defensive focus. And, I don't know if that's going to carry over. And as it stood last year before his 3-touchdown game against Atlanta, Fuller was very lackluster. Then he came back for one game that nobody was on him against Indy. It looked very good, and then immediately got hurt again. And I'll appeal to Dr. Gene Bramwell, who I'm lucky enough to do a show with once a week, working over Football Guys, where he bristles at the idea of calling a player injury prone. But there is a certain point where we can say that we don't know what we're missing. Is it conditioning? Is it something about the player's physiology? I like to use the term wound tight. I just think that Will Fuller is one of those players that is wound tight, and it's difficult for him to, we'll see about Laviska Shenault and see if it applies to him, where it's just going to be difficult for him to stay on the field for a sustained time. I think the Houston passing game, I'm much more interested in Randall Cobb. I think it's being completely overlooked. We know, going back to the Deshaun Watson, Hunter Renfrow days, that he likes that slot receiver. It was supposed to be Kiki Cutie, and I'll just shed a little tear for that. Once you're in Bill O'Brien's doghouse, there's a lock on it. And it asked Jalen Strong. I thought that, by the way, that was totally under the radar, that Jalen Strong broke the taboo of saying, this is what actually happens in camp. Like, I didn't even get a chance to show what I could do because the coaches already made up their mind that I couldn't do it. And I think that's what's happening to poor Kiki Cutie. So, I'm more interested maybe even in Brandon Cooks. I feel like maybe the fantasy community has moved on from Brandon Cooks. I know he had the 2 concussions. Cooks and Sterling Shepard, I think, stand for this idea that if you get 2 concussions in a season, the fantasy community just moves on from you and doesn't really give you credit for what you've done. I wonder if Brandon Cooks is the player, if defenses think that Fuller is Watson's guy, that you have to not let Fuller beat you. Does Cooks then become the guy who, when Watson keeps the play alive, or the design deep shots? So I'm just not sure about the Texans pass offense without DeAndre Hopkins and how it's going to all shake out. And I feel like I can make a case for Cooks, Cobb, or Fuller, and Fuller's usually the most expensive one.
Yeah. It's a point that people bring up a lot, Evan. I know you've kind of been against this in the past, where opportunity matters more than defensive shading and stuff. You could say DeAndre Hopkins was drawing all the defensive attention. Maybe that's true. Does it really affect Will Fuller, though, if his target share is going to go up? Where are you at on Will Fuller?
Just take him in the 7th round every single time. I'm gonna get the win here. One of the other fallouts from the off-seasonless year is that I want to bet on quarterback to pass catcher connections that are established. And Randall Cobb is new, and Kenny Stills, I guess, is facing a felony, and Brandon Cooks is new, and Deshaun Watson knows Will Fuller. And I totally get what Sigmund's talking about with the being wound tight with Will Fuller. I mean, this is 22 games now he's missed in 4 seasons. Some of the injuries have been legitimately bad luck. I think that in 2018, he tore his ACL. That can be a bad luck thing. Fractured ribs he missed time with. He broke his collarbone. one preseason, but there have been enough hamstring strains. There have been 3 hamstring strains, and there have been groin problems that required a sports hernia surgery this past January. With that said, I mean, this is like one of the healthiest off seasons of Will Fuller's career. It's a contract year if you like to buy into that sort of thing. And I like betting on this connection with Deshaun Watson and Will Fuller as opposed to all the new guys.
Yeah. All right, running a little bit low on time here. I do want to get to this last guy here though, because this was a take that I didn't expect out of Sig, and that was to be okay with Raheem Mostert in the 4th round. And this was before the trade demand. This was before all that. I want to just address this in a vacuum without the trade demand, because nobody thinks that San Francisco is actually going to be able to trade Raheem Mostert. And maybe this affects him in other ways. But anyways, we love Raheem Mostert here, Sig. I mean, I was playing Raheem Mostert in preseason DFS in like 2015, and it was just a total print fest. One of the best preseason players of all time. He remains, though, a journeyman in an offense where he did not play a real role as a pass catcher. And when Tevin Coleman was healthy, Tevin Coleman was taking a reasonable share of work in this Kyle Shanahan offense. So I think you could see major usage regression for Raheem Mostert. And I think that's just a really big thing when you don't play in the pass game. Also, I thought a lot of people just had the playoffs and the late season run stuck in their minds. And that's why Mostert was going in the 4th round or so. I really don't see a bull case for Raheem Mostert other than the guy's a preseason god. So give us the Raheem Mostert bull case.
Yeah, it's simply the best player in an efficient, productive backfield. And you're counting on Kyle Shanahan, and maybe this is a bad idea because he seems to have this affinity for Tevin Coleman, to watch the games and say, our offense is better when that guy's on the field than when that guy's on the field. And we've seen anytime Mostert get north of 13, 15 touches, he puts up league winner type numbers. So I think, again, this is a theme, right? I'm recency bias. Maybe I'm being overly swayed by the last time we saw these players, but I just feel like maybe it would take a few games to correct itself. And I do think that Mostert is going to stay with the 49ers. This is an excellent buying opportunity in redraft and in Dynasty. That we remember this when it was Orlando Scary, when it was Mike Anderson. There are some players, running backs in this scheme, that maybe if you took them and put them somewhere else, they wouldn't pop the way they do. But obviously, Raheem Mostert has has the mind meld with how the Kyle Shanahan running game works. And it just seems like that's something that I want to put a chip on, that the coach will come to his senses, than the coach will stick with the prior usage patterns. But that's often the kind of thing, again, like get to another player, I'd say, no, I'm going to go with the prior usage patterns. I just don't trust it. And, this is how lawyers can talk out of both sides of their mouth and still collect a check.
Evan, I don't think we need to go through our Raheem Mostert take. We've talked about it plenty on here. I do wonder if his ADP is certainly sinking as a result of the trade demand. Would you even be tempted by Raheem Mostert in maybe the 6th round or 7th round, where he seems to be dropping a lot now because of the trade demand?
Yes. I'm glad that Sig hit on this. First of all, I thought it was funny that Sigmund is the guy who coined the term assumption of rational coaching, and his entire Raheem Mostert take is assumption of rational coaching.
Because it's Kyle Shanahan. Like, he's one of the few guys that will say, well, maybe he can figure out how wrong he was. But Sean McVay is showing us that, some of these young guns are too high on themselves. So, yeah.
But no, now, if you could get him at the 6-7 turn or something like that, I mean, smash the button. I didn't like him in the 4th, and because I think that there are some awesome receivers there. And I just, the 4th round running backs like Leonard Fournette. Actually, Leonard Fournette goes in the 3rd round every draft. And I'm like, I wouldn't even take him 3 rounds after that. I mean,
right.
I can't believe how early he's going, man. I mean, he's going to be, I don't know. We'll focus on Raheem Mostert. So Raheem Mostert had an 8-game run last season as the 49ers lead back, including the playoffs. He drew 12 targets in those 8 games. He scored 13 touchdowns. That's like Derrick Henry stuff. So are you willing to bet on Raheem Mostert essentially, overcoming a really poor passing game projection and needing to score almost at a Derrick Henry sort of in that style, and that really scares me. Tevin Coleman is going to be back healthy. I know. I mean, I think football guys and Waldman and Bloom, they have been down on Tevin Coleman from day one, and I would say that they've largely been right about that. But Kyle Shanahan still loves this guy. They've got Jeffrey Wilson coming back. They might have McKinnon coming back. The undrafted rookies that they've got are pretty interesting. But yes, I think that now is the time to buy, because I mean, if you see what Raheem Mostert is asking for, it's nothing. He wants like $1.5 million more dollars. And the 49ers, I think, would be silly actually to not give him that almost as a reward. And even if he somehow evaporates from the backfield again, he's going to be a killer on special teams. I mean, he's a really good football player. So I think that now is absolutely the time to buy. But yeah, I did not like him when he was going the fourth round.
Yeah, I think lack of pass game role, touchdown dependency threatened by Tevin Coleman would be enough for me to pass on him even in the 6th round. But, maybe that's just my take. Okay. Great debates here.
And once they pay him, which I think they will, then his ADP is going to go like into the 3rd round.
Oh, if you like Raheem Mostert, now is for sure the time to take him, if you do like him, without a doubt, in all formats. Okay, this was awesome. Thanks so much for debating, Sig. Tell the people where they can find you, where they can find your work, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, football guys, we're obsessed, just like these wonderful men and all of you listening out there, just thinking about fantasy football, especially now, so we don't have to think about other things and thinking about football at Sigmund Bloom. And I think this is a great exercise. And the important thing is familiarizing yourself with all the sides of these arguments. So when we see the first few weeks of the season, you'll understand the track that we're on and how to react appropriately. Because this year more than ever, not needing 4 weeks of evidence before you go in on something, because it's going to be different. I don't know how it's going to be different, but it's going to be way different than what we're expecting. So I enjoyed this exercise, and I look forward to any other times we get to cross paths.
All right, for sure. Thanks so much. Follow Sig on Twitter at Sigmund Bloom. Evan and I will be back. We're going to start trying to do about 2 podcasts a week, ramping it up here as the season gets closer. Also, check out our brand new NBA podcast, which is on a separate feed. If you're into NBA, you're looking to play DFS for the restart, we have you covered there on a separate established run NBA feed. Go ahead and search for that. So, for Evan, for Sigmund, for producer Luke, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.